we're going to go ahead and remove the air filter box. Actually, the air filter box, disconnect it from the throttle body, and disconnect this breathing tube going into your front valve cover. I'll show you all those parts. This one is broken. I have a new one already ordered and on the way. There's usually a clip that folds over and snaps this tight. They're broken, so for now we had it zip tied. Cut that out of the way. Get rid of that. You just push this back, grab your air filter, get your air filter out of there. Now, to remove, well, we're going to start with the hose first. To remove the hose from the throttle body, back here there's a hose clamp, and just loosen that up. Once you have it loose, it'll slip right off your throttle body, but just leave it on for now. This right here, this is where that notepad I was going to tell you is going to come in handy. So this is the plug for your mass flow air sensor. For somebody new doing this or is not 100% sure, you can do this. And this is what I was talking about, how I can show you how to do this. Get yourself a notepad. If you can see that. This one here is 2 pages. This page right here is marked wires. And you can mark second page, hoses. Get in there. And hoses. With those 2 pages, every time you take a plug off, which this one goes to the mass flow air sensor, start a number from 1 to whatever. Write down what that is, mass flow air sensor. If you want to write down the location of it, which we will show later on, there's some wires that are in some really weird spots, you won't find them again. Mark that, and then take a piece of tape. You can either mark your plug or mark it around your wire, whichever way you prefer to do it. Put in number 1 on that piece of tape. Take that tape, wrap around your wire, and there's that. To mark where its location is, for you to remember where it goes if you want. Again, another piece of tape, make a number 1, or whatever number you're on. Put that piece of tape right where that plug goes in, where it attaches. Now you know when you go back and after you get done, when you come backwards, you'll have every single thing you took off put back on. You'll have your list. And as you fill it out, when you're ready to put everything back together, you go backwards, checking it off that you've reconnected it. You will not miss anything on your car doing it this way. So with that, let's go ahead and finish getting the air filter box out of here. Over here is it's just a breather tube right to the valve cover. There's no clamps or anything on it. Just wiggle it out, comes loose. That, if you leave it like that, when you put the box back on, it'll fall into place. You'll see where it goes. Mass flow air sensor on this plug. Top of this, push in with your thumb and wiggle. Wiggle it, it's out. Get that out of your way. Come back. Start wiggling the hose off of your throttle body. And now that's loose. Now underneath or on the bottom here of the air box, there are 2 on this side and 2 on the other side, overflow bottle. Put it down in there. They're just little push plug, or push, I guess, clamps you would call them. You just push them in, they'll take the whole box off in a bit. We're going to go ahead and remove the face of the air filter box off first. With it removed from your throttle body, just pull the top of the box back out and lift up. It sits, there's two prongs that kind of look like this on the bottom that just sit into tabs. Pull them out. Now for your air box, again, the housing, you can reach the two prongs over here easier. You know, push these two in, pull it up a little bit, put those two in, pull up a little bit, and now your air box is completely out as well. What you have left, which you're going to leave in the car, you're not going to disconnect any of this, you'll have to move it around, but you're not going to disconnect it, is your brain, the computer for the car. The bottom half of this can stay in the car. Everything else can stay right here. It's not going to be in the way. You will have to move it around a little bit as you're pulling the engine and transmission out. Now for any holes, hoses, openings, or anything, you don't want to get any foreign objects inside the motor, especially. It could do some damage. I found that painter's tape is the best that works for me for covering these up. It doesn't leave any residue on any part of your car or the engine, and as well, it peels off pretty easy, and it's real strong. It stays there the whole time. So with that, we're going to cover up the throttle body. You want to cover these up as you're going around disconnecting things if you come across an opening that you make, because you don't want screws, nuts, bolts, or you just don't want anything falling down in there. It'll cause you a headache. Taped off. Wrap this around and just hold it. And that'll be good until you're ready to reinstall the engine and put the air filter back on. All right, now with the air filter out, now we can actually start working on the wiring harness, which can look intimidating, but it's really not. It's an octopus of wires going through your car. It's everything on your car. You don't really necessarily, if you're not sure what they go, you know, what it goes to or what the name of it is, there's no need to worry about that. Just when you pull a plug, like I showed you a minute ago, and we'll do it again. When you pull a plug out, just tape a number to the wire, one end of the plug, and put the same identical number on the actual plug on the other side. And as you go through removing them, you won't miss putting that wire back on when you check it off and realize everything's been checked off or you're missing something. So, all right, so there's no particular way to really pull the wires off. I like to start just on one side, work my way around the top half of the motor and the sides, back over to the passenger side. You can start on that side, you can start on this side, it doesn't matter, but it's easier when you go to put it back together if you start in one direction and go all the way around and then come back. There are a few wires on the bottom, ground wires, and some plugs that we'll get to later, but for now we'll just work on the tops. There's two plugs back here that you start off with. One goes to your brake, the booster cylinder, and the other one is on the back side of this. They're the two hardest ones to get over here. Again, just pull them off, mark them, and move on. Just take your time. The plugs are either push plugs, pull plugs. They're not really that hard to take apart. Like this one here is just a push tab. You push it in, releasing the plug, and it's done. With your pen marker, if you haven't done this before, this is your best friend. Some people might say, oh, you don't need to do that. Well, I've had cars come back from dealerships with parts missing or not put on. So it doesn't hurt. So don't worry about it. You'll get everything back together and your car will be running fine when you're done. If the tape comes off, you'll have your notepad, some notes. Just make a note like this one here. You can mark it plug number 2 and mark brake booster. So you'll know this isn't coming off. But if that one happens to come off because of some oil or some grease, you'll know that the brake booster plug, it goes towards the back and you'll be able to find it. Sometimes you'll need a screwdriver to get in and push on the prongs, like this one here. There's no room for your fingers to do anything down there. Push in the prong, pry out the plug. Sometimes when these wires in the wiring harness, pay attention, take pictures if you have to. They're routed through certain directions for reasons. That way they don't get tangled up and they don't get involved in something else in the car. So like this one here is tucked behind the mounting bracket with the brake booster, but you're gonna have to pull it out to move the wiring harness eventually to get this out. So just remember where you've pulled them out or take pictures. Show you this here. You'll see in some spots the wiring harness is held on by little plastic push-in tie downs. With those, they do get worn out. You can buy new ones. But those, just give them a tug, pull, and they'll come out. When you go back to putting the wiring harness back together, they'll fall just right back into place where they need to be. And you'll know where to put them. So as you can see, the wiring harness slowly disappearing from up there, and we're able to pull it back, getting it out of the way, making more progress to where we can pull the motor. So we're going to work on that plug down there. Where is it? Down in here, and then come to this one and move forward from there. All right, so what I didn't show you is next to that plug, there is another wire coming off of here, right there. And to access that, it's easier to come around here into the wheel well. And bring that plug down into the wheel well area. And you can disconnect it and tape and tie it off there. Everything's starting to clear out, make a little bit more room for you. Now we're on the wiring harness, because it just continues by all the way around one continuous loom. We're now at the starter. So you've got one plug and 2 power wires going to the starter here. For tagging this or marking this with your tape, since these 2 powers are going right to this post, mark them with the same number, and when you mark it on your notepad, just mark it, that whatever number that may be, mark it times 2. And if you have to, take a picture again to see how they go on and attach. And then there's one plug right here that we have to remove. All right, to remove that, just pull the boot to protect the boot off. Say a 13mm wrench. Take and loosen the nut up on that stud. Trying to get the boot out of my way. Pull the nut off. There's a lock washer behind the nut. Which I'm going to lose. And your 2 wires. Take your nut and lock washer. Stick them back on the post. They'll be there when you go back to put it back together. So out of the way, we'll mark those in a minute. The plug, this one here, it's just to push in with your fingertip. Wiggle the plug. Out it comes. Now, at this point of the wiring harness in this car, it splits again inside the harness. You have a split. Let's see if I can get a camera shot of this. So now that we have the starter disconnected, you can see that the wiring harness coming down that we've disconnected here comes down and splits out again. One of the looms goes down underneath the motor. I believe that's a ground wire down there and something else. Comes up here, splits again. Some wires come up, go into your computer. The other wires feed up and continue on up into your injectors and your injector plugs. And then the other side where your alternator and stuff are. We're going to continue with the wiring harness. We're not going to worry about going underneath of the car right now. We're just going to continue across the top and get those done. Then we'll come back to this point with our numbers and continue underneath, disconnecting the electric fans and the ground wires and anything else going over, feeding the alternator and your fuse box over there. So nothing to be done with the computer of the car. That, again, like I said, stays there, doesn't come out. That'll not be in your way. Pop these plastic clamps. These bigger plastic clamps come apart by, you take a screwdriver. Once you put your screwdriver in there, give it a twist, and then the clamp comes off. There's no need to pull it off of here, off of that. And then that'll be sitting there, those 2 clamps. And there's a few more as we go across. They'll be sitting there, helping you guide that wiring harness back into its position it's supposed to sit in. Again, wiring harness is split in here 3 times. One's going to your throttle body. The other one's going to the top of your intake manifold. And the other one is running around the back. And I honestly don't remember where it goes. That one's going to be a tough one to get. We'll get to it. We'll loosen up these other, we'll take these other 2 off first. That way we can move this a little bit more out of the way and get to where we need to get to. That plug's also, this bottom wire, the plug's going into the side of your intake manifold as well. We'll start with the throttle body. Again, this one. All of these plugs for this wiring harness are either push or squeeze type till we get to the intake plugs. They're just a little bit different, but they're still a squeeze or push type. They just have locks on them to keep them from vibrating, coming out and stuff like that. So right here on the throttle body, back side of it, push in. Sometimes they stick. The way you can get around that if they're sticking, push the plug in some, push it forwards in some, push down on that clamp, and then pull it backwards, and it'll come out if they're sticking. They're just locked in place. Actually, get my light here. Let's see what I'm doing underneath here. So this one here, I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver. I can see it. It's a pry up, pull out type locking plug. Grab a flathead screwdriver. You're not going to get your fingers in there to do this. It's unless you pull the throttle body off, and it's not. You don't need to. Lift it up. Wiggle the screwdriver, and out it comes. And that one's done. So now we have the wiring harness loose all the way up to the injectors. So the wiring harness feeds directly to your injectors and the plug. Injector, plug, same thing. 4 on this side, and there's 4 buried in the back side here. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and mark the injector plugs. Just take your number, corresponding with the injector plug. Just lay the number right on top of the fuel rail, right here. All right, so this one, this plug here has a, I guess you would call it a safety feature. It's to keep this from vibrating or coming loose by accident. So there's an added step to removing this. Very simple. Grab yourself a pair of needle nose pliers. What you'll do is this tab right here, just you squeeze it together. It's got little 2 pieces that stick out. You squeeze that together and pull it through. That's part of it. Then you take the tab, lift up on your tab, wiggle again, wiggle the plug out, plugs out. That's disconnected now, so you don't lose your little tab here. Just stick it back in there and throw some tape over it. Right. Painter's tape. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It just has to hold that in there so you don't lose it. That's done. So that end's done. Wiring harness again. I'm going to go ahead and pop this off. Just pull it out. This one over here I broke. Broke that a while back and just haven't gotten a new one. I have a wire tie holding it on. Cut the wire tie off. So now your wiring harness is loose here. We're going to work on removing the injector plugs. There we go. Again, these have a safety feature on them. I'm going to use a screwdriver just so my fingers aren't in the way and you can see what I'm doing. So with this injector plug here, this green part here, it's a push tab. So the gray part here pushes in and you pull the plug up. This green tab right now is pushed down. Another safety feature, keeping that from wiggling loose or coming off of the engine causing a misfire on your motor. So to remove these, all you gotta do with your fingers, you lift up on that green plug. Pop that green plug, goes up and down. Take and push in that gray tab. Again, I'll use a screwdriver so you can see a little bit better. It's difficult. That green tab, or excuse me, the gray tab gets pushed in. I'm gonna have to do it with my fingers. It won't work. Squeeze the gray tab, wiggle, pull up. And we're gonna do that for all 4 on this side. You have to take a little bit of care when you're pulling the plugs on and off, but for the wiring harness itself, you're not going to hurt it. Pulling it around, getting it out of your way. You don't want to be rough with it. So those are all disconnected. Move up. Just keep following it. Again, another splice off of the wiring harness right to this plug here. Pretty simple. Mark your wire, squeeze your plug, wiggle it out. All right, so now we're getting over to the fuse box. Let's branch off of the fuse box. This one goes down to one of the sensors on the side, and then your alternator. From your alternator, we go right back across the coil packs, get to the coil packs, and your fuel vapor recovery hose right here. And that's the end of the wiring harness. And then we'll go back and start on the underside of the car.